Okay, good afternoon. Well, here in the UK, good afternoon to our monthly BIPS webinar, The Hunt is Erotic and Military Training in Early New Persian Poetry. I'm very delighted to welcome our speaker today, Domenico Ingenito. Domenico is an associate professor of Persian literature at the University of California, Los Angeles, where I have to say I was very proud to have done my PhD way back in the days when we wrote with quill, pen, and candles. I understand now things are much more updated, but it was very hard to do a PhD in those days. He is the incoming Bahari Fellow in Persian Arts of the Book at the Bodleian Libraries at the University of Oxford this spring. His research interests center on medieval Persian poetry, the visual culture of Iran and Central Asia, gender and translation studies, and manuscript culture. His most recent articles are Hafez's Shirazi Turk, a geopolitical approach in Iranian studies, and a marvelous painting, The Erotic Dimensions of Sa'di's Praise Poetry, in the Journal of Persianate Studies. His most recent book is Beholden Beauty, Sa'di of Shiraz and the Aesthetics of Desire in Medieval Persian Poetry, published by Brill in 2020. His Italian translation of Farrukhī's collected poems, along with all of the original text, will be published in 2023 by Bompiani. And Domenico is currently working on an English translation of a selection of Sa'di's poems due to come out at the University of California Press, and a monograph on kingship, poetic creativity, and homoeroticism in the context of Ghaznavid praise poetry. So Domenico, without further ado, I'm going to turn off, and the floor, literally and figuratively, is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew, Professor Newman, for your kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me to this prestigious lecture series. I see many names of dear friends and colleagues and students even. Thank you for being with us today. The talk that I will be sharing, the thoughts I'm going to share with you, is based on an article that I'm currently preparing, and also a monograph on Ghaznavid poetry. That's right. So the hunt as erotic military training in early New Persian poetry, and I will open this with a line by my beloved poet Farrukhī Sīstānī, early 11th century CE. Kings were always known to enjoy four things: the game of polo, fighting, feasting, hunting. چهار چیز گزین بود خسروان را کار، نشاط کردن چوگان و رسم و bazm-u شکار. You can see also this image, this beautiful painting, a detail from a wall painting in Lashkari Bazaar in modern Afghanistan, from a palace, probably of Mahmud the first, early 1030s. We'll be talking about eroticism, of course, hunting, and gift exchange, and the role of poetry in the way that poetry keeps these things together in shifting between literary representations and reflection of historical reality. We'll be focusing on the very much studied Ghaznavid Empire. This is the outdated now image of the Ghaznavid Empire, the peak of its expansion, but despite being outdated, it shows very well what regions of Central Asia, Iran, and the Indian subcontinent were involved in the expansion of the renowned Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni and his son Mas'ud during the first 3 or 4 decades of the 11th century. You can see here the main capital cities also of the Ghaznavid Empire, Ghazni and Balkh, both in modern day Afghanistan. We'll be talking about a genre that has been studied quite extensively in the field of Persian literary studies, but its appreciation is yet to pick up in the general readership. I'm talking about the qasida, or praise poetry, or the genre of praise poetry that is usually expressed through this form that is a long text ranging between 20, 25, and even 90, 100 lines, opening with an exordium that is erotic or amateur in content, called nasib, between 3 and 20 lines, and then there is a transition called takhallos, or disengagement, that leads the audience toward the madih, or encomium, or praise section proper. There is also this Persian innovation that this structure is something that we find also in the Arabic qasida as a form, as an encomiastic genre. What is different in the Persian structure, the way that Iranian poets adopted the Arabic qasida, is this final immortalizing prayer. We will see why this is extremely important in this context. The Du'a Tabid, in which in 2 or 3 lines the poet creates a link. They create a link between eternal, constant facts, events that relate to nature, to cosmic balances, and the stability of the kingdom and the stability of the presence of the ruler. You can see how these different elements of the qasida are extremely important and in the way they relate to each other when analyzing poems like the one by Farrukhī Sīstānī. I'll tell you more about him soon, in a qasida in which that he dedicated to Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni quite early on, probably in the 1016 or 1017. You can see how there's this erotic opening: "Come forth, O Turk, and put aside his battle garments, grab your lyre and drop your sword and shield." So you can see how there's this erotic element, the ethnic dimension, also the ideal object of desire, who is a soldier, male soldier, young male soldier, but also an entertainer, a court entertainer. "Time has come for you, for your bow to rest under your arm. Time has come for you to sit down and play the harp. Don't go to the ambush. The enemy has abandoned the battle. The army is now resting from this threat. Come and rest from the war. Do not roam among the lines of the army and its dirt. Full of dust may turn your dark locks, O commander of the army. Now gently brush off the army's dust from your curls, so that along with dust, fragrant musk may drip from your hair. Do not hide your bright cheeks under your armor. By rubbing the armor, your white face might turn rusty. Oh, you whose eyelashes are arrows, bow-like eyebrows. What is your arrow for? Your eyelashes can pierce one's heart more sharply than the white poplar arrow." So this is the erotic opening. We see how the poet now transitions from this erotic vignette to the beginning of the praise of the Sultan, Sultan Mahmud. "So deeply the arrow of your eyelashes pierces my heart and soul that it resembles the spear of the king of the East when passing through iron and stone. The holy warrior King Mahmud, of prophetic temperament, the religious king who cultivates virtues and enjoys perfect wisdom." And then follows I will spare you the long section of praise, which is concluded by this beautiful erotic, also immortalizing prayer. So at the very end of the poem, Farrukhī says, "So long as 7 planets cross the 7 celestial spheres," you see the condition, so the eternal elements combined, then we'll see with the eternal, the wish for eternity. "And 7's found again across the 7 thrones of Ursa, so long as deers escape the lions all months and years, and night and day the crane seeks respite from the falcon. Be merry, or city conquering king, in the mouths of your foes. Your gravitas turns honey into venom. Night and day may cypress-chested beauties be pressed against your chest. All months and years may wine as bright as rust be poured into your cup." So these are the elements that we need to take into account: the erotic, the natural, the cosmic, and the ethnic element of the Turkic presence of both the praised one, so the sultans, but also the objects of desire. So we will see how all these elements come together in different ways. The key Ghaznavid figures are here, and I will start reading a few notes that I prepared for this talk. So the early Ghaznavids were in origin Turkic slaves who began their military career serving the Samanid rulers, who held power in the Transoxanian cities of Samarkand and Bukhara. The first Ghaznavid political and military elites inherited ideals of kingship and strategies of government administration from the Samanids, along with a notable inclination towards patronage of Persian language and literature. Although scholars have recognized the role of poetic patronage as a tool of political propaganda among the early Ghaznavids, the ritualistic and anthropological aspects of poetry composition and performance in early 11th century Ghazni and Balkh have yet to be thoroughly explored and understood within the broad context of Samanid and Ghaznavid symbolic representations of kingship and power. This is what I want to explore in my own research now. In this context, political poetry can be viewed as a fluid linguistic craft that transforms the poet into a cultural mediator between the ruling elites and society as a whole. Through the poet's interpretive intervention, a set of unwritten ethical values and aesthetic norms are organized in the shape of a discourse capable of reflecting social structure in an idealized form. In the Persian qasida, and I go back to the structure so we can think about it together. In the Persian qasida, the rhetorical bond set by immortalizing prayer serves as the broad symbolic context in which more immediate material benefits regulate rapports between poets and patrons. While patrons would rely on the social legitimacy of their power, thanks to propagandistic laws disseminated by their court poets, the latter were rewarded with considerable amounts of wealth, often transferred directly from royal coffers in the form of pecuniary remuneration or through luxurious gifts, such as robes of honor, estates, horses, elephants, and even male or female servants and slaves. Go back to the key figures. The most insightful descriptions of Ghaznavid hunting expeditions are found in the poems of Farrukhī Sīstānī, who served several patrons between Sistan and Transoxania before settling Ghazni, sometime between 1011 and 1014 CE. He dedicated the majority of his panegyric output to Sultan Mahmud, his younger brother Amir Yusuf, and Mahmud's two sons, Masud and Muhammad. Most of the qasidas through which Farrukhī eulogized Prince Muhammad, aged 15 or 16 when Farrukhī entered the Ghaznavid court, began with lyric vignettes depicting amatory exchanges between the poet-lover and fictitious objects of desire. The protagonists of these erotic descriptions are usually typified literary reflections of young male slaves, ghulam, of Turkic origin, who served at the Ghaznavid court and in the army. Ghulams are most likely what this painting, mural painting, represents here in this picture. So they dressed in red and blue. These are the ghulams. Historical, belletristic, and poetic sources unanimously celebrate the beauty of these ghulams and provide detailed accounts of their roles as pages, musicians, and soldiers at court and in the palaces of princes and notables of the state. The possibility of acting as both objects of desire and desiring objects is one of the socio-erotic characteristics of the Turkic ghulams, who were trained to enliven courtly gatherings and disseminate terror on the battlefield on behalf or alongside Ghaznavid rulers. So we have the bazm, right, and razm, the feasting and fighting aspects that are fused together in the present of ghulams at court. Through their physical features, actions, and social functions, they embodied the courtly idea, the Iranian courtly idea of bazm-u razm, feasting and fighting. Their dual role as beloveds and lovers was historically reflected in their status as slaves who, despite being trained as military retainers and traded as sexual goods, could accumulate wealth and, after being granted manumission, gain social mobility in the ranks of the army and the chambers of the court. I'm very interested in this. When we think about slavery in the medieval Persian context, we need to also think how social mobility was creating a much more complicated, much more complex picture. And this is specifically this social mobility that I want to take into account when analyzing how poets would describe social and erotic interactions between princes and ghulams. The homoerotic content characterizing early New Persian praise poetry should not be reduced to a merely reflexive representation of historicized sexual practices. The sensual desires exhibited in these texts reveal an all-encompassing mechanism that used to regulate the poetic expressions of a large variety of social values. These values involved complex socio-anthropological and economic negotiations between poets and patrons vis-a-vis the courtly and military sectors of medieval Turco-Iranian society at large. In the amatory openings of Farrukhī's qasidas, the historical socio-erotic mobility of ghulams as seductive slaves and their literary portrayal as lover-beloveds converge in the recurring lyric mood of the concept of naz-u-niyaz, coquetry and seduction, or naz-u-khashm, seductive charm and disdain. This ambivalence was epitomized by the amorous bond between Sultan Mahmud and his favorite Turkish ghulam, Ayaz, who ascended to important ranks in the Ghaznavid military and courtly apparatuses between the 1020s and the early 1030s. In one of Farrukhī's qasidas to Sultan Mahmud, a reference to this historical liaison provides the poet with a pretext to outline a general theory of the ambivalent nature of desire in connection with the eternalizing prayer. See this qasida here. This is an anachronistic depiction from Sasanian king hunting lions from the Cleveland Museum of Art. Farrukhī, at the end of a qasida dedicated to Sultan Mahmud, says, "So long as love for idols can tame the limbs of lions, so long as seductive beauties subdue the hearts of kings, enjoy the prime of fortune, enjoy the worldly kingdom, enjoy your lengthy life, enjoy the beloved's face." And here he's talking about Ayaz. This is very interesting. And toast with wine to him who makes you love the world, and let him pour you wine, for loving him has made you drunk. Then hold him hand in hand, your face upon his face, with kisses after kisses, and relish life with him. Farrukhī's statement, "Seductive beauties subdue the hearts of kings," encapsulates what was to become decades and centuries later one of the leitmotiven of the Persian literary and mystical discourse on love. Desire causes even a world conqueror like Sultan Mahmud to be enslaved to his beloved slave. In the context of this paper, however, what these lines attest to is the reversibility of power dynamics in the figurative speech that poets relied on in order to seduce their patrons and solidify their bonds of clientelage. In fact, in Farrukhī's poetry, from a strictly literary perspective, depictions of ghulams as objects of desire stage the idealized courtly connection between political power, dynastic continuity, and the celebration of worldly pleasures. The socio-anthropological flip side of the conjunction between these values lies in the Ghaznavid Empire's peculiar economy, based on uninterrupted displays of courtly opulence and a permanent state of warfare. The playfulness with which Farrukhī represents complex erotic exchanges between these young Turkic men and the Ghaznavid political elites speaks to the social mobility with which slaves, soldiers, and court entertainers were attached to different and often overlapping social circles in contexts that often offered them the chance to become free men, commanders of the army, or even landowners. Through this typified fictitious depictions, Farrukhī elevates these human objects of desire to the function of rhetorical points of contact between his own socioeconomic agenda as a court poet and the political agency of his Ghaznavid patrons. In the case of young princes, like in the case of Mahmud's son, Muhammad, we witness a process that leads to a progressive eroticization of the rhetoric of gift-giving taking place between poets and princes. The dynamics of gift exchange take the shape of a constant act of mutual seduction. The poet and the prince symbolically seduce each other, replicating the interchangeability of the roles of lover and beloved. Far from being mere hyperbolic accounts of the prince's gesta, poetic descriptions of the princely hunt stage the erotics of sacrifice as dynamics of gift exchange at the confluence of opulent courtly expenditure and perennial warfare. One specific qasida by Farrukhī Sīstānī, which I will refer to as the cheetahs as lovers poem, yes, cheetahs, the animals, the feline, displays the full extent of the role of eroticism and seduction in the poet's representation of his young patrons' hunting expeditions. Farrukhī opens the text in praise of Prince Muhammad with a description of a beloved, Delbar, who, on his way back from the battlefield, unties his green waistcoat. The poet compares the soldier's bare chest to a lily appearing amidst the greeneries in a garden. A further transition from the military to the amatory setting of this vignette is marked by reference to the dust from the battlefield, falling from his jasmine-scented curls, which adorn his anemone-like face. In truth, you'd say, Farrukhī says, addressing this beloved coming back from the battlefield, the wind was opening pods of musk while blowing through his hair. The breeze then grabbed his black curls and separated ringlets from one another. In truth, you'd say dolls of musk were playing around the ground camphor. Suddenly, the beautiful boy, as white as silver from head to toe, sees Farrukhī and starts running towards him. When he saw me, he started running in my direction. That boy whose body appeared as pure silver. In truth, you'd say he was a prey who ran from the cheetah of the prince, the lion hunter. You see how the transition is here. Prince Abu Ahmad Muhammad, who steered doomsday among all animals in his hunting ground. In the context of this switch from diegetic to extra-diegetic narration, Farrukhī crafts a textual shift that is very much characteristic of the Ghaznavid qasida, and which involves a transition between the opening amatory vignette and the praise section proper. In order to introduce his patron, Farrukhī states that the young soldier running in this direction resembles in truth a prey chased by Prince Muhammad's cheetah. What follows is an animated description of Muhammad's hunting ground, where his soldiers encircle a large number of wild animals depicted as slaves running towards their masters. Muhammad encircles the wild animals with an enclosure of soldiers described by Farrukhī as Turkic dolls from Khazar. At the prince's command, the presence of such beautiful hunters metaphorical turns the steppe into a garden encircled by tall cypresses. The lyrical analogy of this hunting scene shifts to a military parallel. The animals are now compared to a demoralized, wounded, and confused army of opponents about to succumb to the prince's soldiers in the middle of the battlefield. Having set an intricate metaphoric analogy between the amatory and military characteristics of Muhammad's soldiers, Farrukhī applies once again a human-animal parallel by describing them as deer-eyed beauties who set out to pierce the actual deer's livers with arrows. See how there's this constant shift between the military and the erotic within the game of hunting. The king of the world eventually encircled them with an army of dolls from Khazar, the soldiers. In truth, you'd say the plain was turned into a garden entirely surrounded by cypress trees. Before the prince, deer-eyed idols, the gulams, pierced the livers of all the prey. In truth, you'd say there were opponents facing the mighty warriors of this army. Farrukhī's reiterated mention of Muhammad's hunting cheetahs introduced a new twist in the narrative plot. In the poet's description, they suddenly jump over their prey as if they were fighters holding black shields, a reference to the characteristic spots of these felines. As in the case of horses and hounds acting as externalized souls of the hunters celebrated by pre- and early Islamic Arabic qasidas, Muhammad's cheetahs can be seen as an animal extension of the prince's presence. By metonymically acting as analogues of the prince and metaphorically pursuing the charming soldiers who resemble the deer they hunt, the cheetahs close the circle of correspondences between the military, erotic, animal, and human dimensions of the symbolic exchanges at play in these poems. From the other side appear the roaring cheetahs, resembling the most furious of male lions. In truth, you'd say they were fighters, each one holding a shield against their chest. With no efforts, their palates' desires were satisfied, each one happily falling upon their prey. In truth, you'd say they resembled lovers who pressed beloveds into their embrace. In fact, if at the beginning of the text, the commonly Turkic soldier appears as a deer-looking object of Muhammad's cheetah's desire, in this final section of the poem, Farrukhī suggests that in truth, these cheetahs mauling their prey resemble lovers embracing their beautiful beloveds. This final charge causes the entire hunting ground to be stained by the prey's blood, which Farrukhī compares to the ruby lips of the beautiful soldier described in the opening of the poem. And we go back. This is the circle. The end of the poem reconnects with the erotic opening. From their blood, the entire ground turned like the lips of that beloved idol, which Farrukhī saw the very opening, the very beginning. In truth, you say that the prince's charisma, Far, turned all stones into scarlet rubies amidst that plain. The symbolic equation is now complete. Prey and young Turkish soldiers equal each other as objects of desire in the royal hunt, and by extension of Prince Muhammad himself in the symbolic guise of his lion-looking cheetahs. How do we account, though, for the constant shifts between the portrayal of human objects of royal desire in the form of the same prey they are hunting, and the personification of the hunted animals as similes of the beautiful Turks who are chasing them? As Yaroslav Statkiewicz noted in his study of the historical development of Arab Tardiya poetry, the Arab hunt qasida underwent a transition during the Abbasid period, transforming the pre- and early Islamic ritualistic aspects of the genre into lyrical celebrations of courtliness. Farrukhī's hunting qasidas certainly follow this tradition, imbuing the literary game of the hunt with the erotics of power that characterize the Ghaznavid panegyric output. In this text, the game of war and the game of the hunt overlap through playfully ritualized metaphorical exchanges between hunters and prey, lovers and beloveds. These shifts result in the convergence of erotic and military potential into a ritual sacrifice presided over by Prince Muhammad. In fact, at the end of the poem, by means of an eroto-sacrificial etiology, the poet ascribes to the prince's royal charisma, his glorious Far, the cosmic source that enabled all stones in the plain to be transmuted into scarlet jewels. We may read this massacre as a ritual sacrifice presided over by the prince in the fashion of a gift-giving potlatch, during which, as Farrukhī specifies, 1/3 of the game was given to the prince's personal retainers, and the rest was offered to the troops participating in the hunt. It was for their sake, in truth, the poet underlines, that the extraordinary hunting expeditions of the handsome Khubruī prince took place. From a historical perspective, what we learn from the conclusion of this poem, as well as the martial metaphors deployed by Farrukhī, is that Prince Muhammad performed his hunting expedition for the purpose of providing his soldiers with a military exercise. They would be rewarded with a distribution of gifts. On the one hand, the game of the hunt is, in truth, a preparation for warfare. On the other hand, it tests the level of training and personal commitment of Muhammad's subjects and solidifies the homosocial bonds between the prince and his extended entourage. I argue, and I conclude here, that the amatory overtones of the metaphors Farrukhī deploys in his text highlight the value of male homoerotic desires in the shaping of courtly and military bonds between the prince and his gholams. The handsomeness of the boys that Farrukhī portrays should not be relegated to the realm of literary affectation. Their beauty and seductiveness were, in fact, key elements of the social exchanges that shaped their presence at court and on the battlefield. Thus, what Farrukhī reenacts through poetic invention is the aesthetic aspect of an economy based on a process of mutual seduction between the prince and his associates. Thank you. Thank you so much for your attention. It was a long talk. I apologize, and be happy to discuss with you or take questions.
That was excellent. Thank you very, very much. And I like the way you blended the art, as it were, with the poetry. Could I ask, take my position as chair or whatever it is my position is here, to ask a question about the qasida prior to Farrukhī and also after, and how it was that he utilized what was already there and changed it, but also what was his legacy, the extent to which either implicitly or explicitly one can see the sorts of things he was doing with the qasida in later work.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking. Yes.
No,
absolutely. We know very little about pre-Ghaznavid qasida. So qasida from the Sasanian periods, we know about, we have texts from Rudaki or Dapiti, we have fragments here and there. We see that it was still a formative period. We see that there is the influence of oral traditions, Persian oral traditions, the Arabic Abbasid canon is being introduced more consistently, there was still experimentation happening at the time. So this is what we can gather, we can glean from those fragments that remain. I believe that it's during the early Ghaznavid period that there is a peculiar social structure that allowed poets to crystallize and start forming a canon, and start forming the standard of writing qasida. And the legacy is it can be hardly underestimated. There is no way to understand the future of Persian poetry, the whole history of Persian poetry, not only qasida poetry, but even ghazal poetry, without understanding what was going on during those very first decades of the 11th century in Ghazni and Balkh mainly. So we usually don't really see those links very clearly, but anything that is processed and discussed in terms of amatory, the love discourse that became so famous during the 13th century, 14th century, 15th centuries in the ghazal poetry, all goes back to the way that qasida poetry was celebrating reality somehow. So this is the key moment. So the legacy is absolutely there. It's extremely important too. Farrukhī became forgotten after the Mongol invasion to an extent. Daulat Shah Samarkandi, by the end of the 15th century, says that his divan is matruk, is forgotten, abandoned, and dismissed, and because his language was not really understood anymore, probably. So the Seljuk and Mongol poets became the main source of reference and models. But then he was discovered during the 17th century and 18th century, and then there was the Bazgasht Adabi. That's why the oldest manuscripts recording Ghaznavid divans are from the 17th century, so we don't really have much from before that.
That's quite interesting. I've got a question or two, but I'll again extend my privilege as chair, because again, in the Safavid period, one sees the rediscovery, as it were, of religious texts as well, Shi'i religious texts in particular. So it seems as if the 16th and 17th century, and especially the 17th century, is a period of rediscovery in other areas as well. That's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Thank you again to our lecturer. And with that, I bid you a good evening. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.